second presentation is from Professor Jacques Poot. He's a local at Waikato University, but also with the National Institute of Demographics and Economic Analysis. So please join me in welcoming Jacques Poot.
Kia ora, good morning, Purumaraka. I'm a migrant myself. I'm an economist and I work here at the National Institute of Demographic and Economic Analysis at the University of Waikato. But I actually have 3 jobs. I'm also teaching economics at the economics department, and a third of my time I work in Europe on migration research with a number of institutes there. And today I'd like to talk to you a bit about international perspectives on diversity research. And so some of the work that I actually also involved with New Zealand research on this, and some of that work Professor Paul Spoonley of Massey will be talking about later on, because we're together on a big New Zealand project. So that's what I will only be focusing on the work that I do abroad in this presentation. So, first of all, perhaps, what do economists think of or work on when they look at diversity issues? And there's a whole list of topics there. I can't cover all of them in this short presentation, but the ones that have got an asterisk behind them are the ones that I want to say a little bit about. First of all, very simple way we argue is actually how would you measure diversity? It may seem very simple. There's different ways in which you could do that. And I'll just give you an example of global diversity in a moment for some work that we've done recently on measuring global diversity. Secondly, I'm going to say a little bit about, that's probably the most commonly studied topic by economists, is what's the link between diversity and wages and employment. And of course, you have to think recently about the issue of kind of gender and wages. But today I'm going to focus predominantly on migration, wages, and employment. Another topic that's very popular right now is to look at what is the effect on productivity and innovation. What's the link with economic growth? And on the other side of so there's the production side. On the consumption side, you can look at trade and consumption. 3 topics that I can't cover today are segregation and segmentation, obviously important. In fact, we have some work on that in the Integration Immigrants program that Paul's going to talk about later on. Discrimination and decision making. The last one is I don't know if any of you know the book by Scott Page called The Difference, How the Power of Diversity Creates Better Groups, Firms, Schools and Society. Scott Page is a real hardcore economist. He does very good theoretical work, but he's also then applying that to understanding how diversity can help communities take better decisions. So if you're interested in that, just Google that particular book. But I won't be able to talk about that further in this presentation. Now obviously, diversity has many dimensions, and I've already mentioned gender a moment ago, age, ethnicity, birthplace, nationality, disability, sexual orientation, religion, among all the different dimensions that you could think of. Now I'm going to, just because of my own research is specifically concerned with international migration, so that's the focus I'm going to have in the rest of this presentation. I said to start with, how would you measure diversity? Well, if it was with respect to ethnic composition of the population, you could look at, for nationality, you could measure the number of countries that are represented. We do that a lot at conferences or in the countries as a whole. You know, how many countries? There's about 230 odd countries in the world, so are all of those represented? That would be one measure, but it doesn't really tell you much about diversity in the sense of how significant is that for the country as a whole to the rest of the population. So there's a very simple measure that we use, is called the diversity index, and you take, I didn't write it down in the mathematics, but it's very read it out in words, it's 1 minus the sum of squared shares of each country of origin in the population. And so if the closer that is to 1, the more diverse the population is. And so here we get the diversity index for, it's a good comparison with the, for Oceania, which is Australia, New Zealand, and the Pacifica nations with the rest of the world. So this is work we've only just recently, Shefali Pawar, our statistician, has helped me with collecting this data from UN and the World Bank. So what you see is here the trend in diversity across the world by looking at whether people are from a different continent. So this is intercontinental diversity. So if you're in a different continent from living in a different continent from where you were born, that is the diversity. What you see, of course, is Oceania is the most diverse continent in the world. And this diversity index, as you should see, it's not that high because, in fact, it could be maximum, as I said, the higher up you go, the more diverse. It would be the fewer, the more the migrant groups are part of the population, the smaller the local population, the more diverse the community would be. Here we include the local population, the host population. And we see, of course, the growth in diversity, particularly in North America, Asia, and see actually Africa diversity declining according to this definition, and same sort of areas where migrants are leaving. If you actually exclude the locals, you talk about the diversity among the migrant groups, you get far higher numbers, of course, far higher index of diversity. Now we see this huge increase in diversity in New Zealand and Australia, and it includes also the Pacifica countries. Between 1970 and 1990, further increases. Here in North America, interestingly, you see a slight decline. Now that occurs when there's one particular migrant group that becomes really dominant among all your migrant groups. And in the case of North America, there's the Mexican migration that has become, that is in a sense, by being relatively large compared to other groups, then it starts to affect the overall diversity index. It was the large increase in Europe and decline in Africa. When most of the research economists are concerned with this is looking at the impacts of diversity, and there's a new development of trying to do this in a very systematic way. It's called Migration Impact Assessment, or MIA. It's not the same as cost-benefit analysis, and basically the problem I have, quite often sometimes people come up to me and say, okay, what is the bottom line? You know, what is the number you want to put on it? What is the value of migration? And the answer to that is there is no single number. That is a justification that is not scientifically responsible. There are a whole range of dimensions, and in MIA, we're trying to categorize all these, and then also using different methods, not just quantitative methods, but also in the research that Wendy just gave an example of, is that the impact of, if you looked at, say, refugees, you look also at mixed methods and qualitative methods as well. And so actually economists are now starting to work with interdisciplinary, with other social scientists to develop this MIA in a multidisciplinary fashion. Well, just very briefly something about labour market impacts of migration. I've been doing a lot of work together with somebody from the UK called Simonetta Lomi and a Dutchman called Peter Nijkamp. And all that research, it's called, we're doing something called meta-analysis, where basically it's like a form of gathering all the studies that have been done around the world and looking for kind of robust findings from all of those. It's like a literature review, but in a particular technical way that kind of tries to summarize all that in a very, trying to get some really hard results out of a whole lot of different types of literature. And when you do that, you find that the kind of thing that is being mentioned, the migrants rob jobs, and I've been in this business for a long time, and still I just cringe when I see these kind of statements being made, still sometimes in the media. There's absolutely no evidence of this. We've gone and read the paper and see that on the whole, the impact of migrants on wages and employment of the locally born people is very, very small indeed. And that is because migrants complement rather than substitute for the locally born. And the only times when we do see some kind of substitution effects is when one migrant group and this is there, and some additional migrants from the same kind of skills, the same backgrounds come into the country, there can be a temporary effect on that particular type of jobs and labour markets that these people work in. They kind of substitute for each other. That is the case, but for generally, migrants complement the host population. Also, institutions matter, that's very clear, so these things do vary across countries. That is, in the US, there's a little bit more evident. There is some wage effect, because wages are very flexible there. In Europe, we find that there's more employment effects, because wages are still quite often set top-down from national governments, and so there you do see some kind of employment effects in some places, but again, they tend to be very, very minor in a quantitative sense. I'll give you, say, a bit more about that in a moment. Generally, also, a real positive impact of migration on labour markets is what we call the greasing of the wheels of the labour market. Because migrants are mobile, they tend to be young, they tend to be willing to go and look for jobs in various areas. They're not, they haven't yet, particularly if they haven't got many links yet at a particular location. They may be geographically more mobile, so that helps to grease the wheels of the labour market within a nation in terms of allowing adjustment. Now, something about the productivity innovation aspect. Just last week, this report released. You can Google this and just look at it. It's a it's a short and very easy to read report by Forbes Insight. It's called Fostering Innovation Through a Diverse Workforce, and it involves interviewing about 350 CEOs of big multinational companies. And the study was about what are these companies doing about diversity, and what do they feel that the diversity is contributing there to their companies. So I said that 321. Okay, so it's just over 100. So some of this was through some in-depth interviews, but also this larger survey. So one of the main conclusions is that diversity is a key driver of innovation and success on a global scale. So this is kind of really the majority of firms felt that it was an important part of their human resource strategy. They also said that they had difficulty recruiting quite often the skilled people that they needed in order to implement their diversity policies, because this term talent, which seems to be very common these days among sort of human resource people and recruiting for these companies, the competition for that is fierce in today's global economy. And the final conclusion was that they felt that there had been a lot of progress on gender and ethnic diversity and inclusion, but that currently that the challenges are in fact on disability and age. So that's of course a topic I won't be covering in this particular presentation, but you can have a look at that report if you're interested in that. So in terms of the research I've been doing myself, is together with a PhD student in Europe, I've been looking at, can you measure the impact of diversity of innovation in a quantitative way? And so what we've been doing is, we've been looking, using different kinds of data. This is on patents. Okay, so people have a new idea, they want to patent it, and this is what the kind of what you get. So you can see, the darker it is, the more innovative that part of Europe is. So our research question was, does that link to the presence of migrants in those particular regions in Europe? And if you do a kind of scatter plot, you can put on the horizontal axis the share of foreigners in these regions, the 170 regions. We can do that at different points in time. And for this on the horizontal axis, the share of foreigners, on the vertical axis, the number of patent applications per million in the population. Well, it looks a pretty bit messy, but there is an upward sloping relationship in there. There's one for 1991, which is a bit flatter. That means it's not as clear. You go up to 2001, it becomes a bit clearer that there's a relationship. The correlation coefficient increases from 0.33 to 0.48. Now, however, there is a big challenge in this kind of research, because the issue is what causes what. Are the regions which are very innovative recruiting skilled workers? Are they recruiting the skilled migrants? Or can we actually prove that it's the presence of the skilled migrants that produces the greater innovation? Well, economics research in recent years has actually made major advances in technology, ways of doing this kind of research, trying to tease out the causal, the chicken and egg issues. And there's some various, this slide gives you a couple of the ideas that have been developed in recent years. The one that I'm going to use is called instrumental variables. Only 5 minutes. This is, time goes so fast when you're having fun, isn't it? Okay, well, I'll just give you an example of that in a moment. What you're trying to do there is you're trying to look for something that explains the presence of migrants, but has nothing to do with innovation. If you can find a variable like that, that can be used to kind of become a proxy for the presence of migrants, but you know that it has nothing to do with innovation, then you can use that in your analysis as a substitute, and then you can see what's left of the correlation. And that's what we've done. Another method is using for counterfactuals. We basically would say you have two regions, and they have the same characteristics in all sorts of ways, except that in one there's more migrants, and in the other one there is not. But for the rest, they're completely identical. Is the one where there is more migrants, are they the ones that have also more innovation? So that would be the so-called counterfactual approach. Natural experiments is where you look at the classical case in economics is that of something called the Mariel boat leave, where people were leaving Cuba all of a sudden and then went to the US, particularly to Florida. There's been a lot of my research has been looking at the impact on the US of this one-off flow that happened in 1980, because that was kind of like an all of a sudden unexpected event. And the final thing, I've got a colleague at Waikato University called John Gibson. He does a lot of this kind of thing, policy-linked randomization. For example, for migration from Pacific Islands to New Zealand, as you know this, for Tonga, there are ballot schemes. And so you can look at kind of the effect of being able to be successful in winning the lottery or not, being allowed to migrate or not, to compare kind of what is the impact of migration. All right, well, what is the research instrument we used for looking at the link between innovation and migration? Well, this one. Why would you, when it's affected, see, we had to find each and every McDonald's in Europe. McDonald's, by the way, the company didn't want to help us. They didn't give us the data, so we had to go and use the internet and find the location of every McDonald's restaurant in Europe. This took a lot of time. And why did we want to know that? Because, in fact, there is a link to the presence of McDonald's and the presence of migrants. Okay, there is quite, of course, McDonald's office jobs. But what does McDonald's do with innovation? The Big Mac is the same here in New Zealand as it is in anywhere in the world, right? Innovation and McDonald's, there's no correlation. They might think so, but then there isn't. So we found that just kind of using this as an instrument actually then gives us an effect of migrants on. So we have here, just don't worry about all the numbers, this diversity index has all these asterisks. This means that we run regressions, quite sophisticated ones that won't go into the details. But the conclusion is here, an increase in the diversity index by 0.1 from the regional mean of 0.5 increases patent applications per million inhabitants by about 0.2%. So it's not huge, but quite often you find in this research you get an effect that is not necessarily, mind-blowing, but it is there, and it's definitely after doing all the statistical analysis that you have to do to not fall into caveats. Okay, another study, because this is pretty broad, this is right across the whole of Europe, we did the same kind of thing for the Netherlands, where we actually went to the firm level.
How did the McDonald's fit in though? Was that put in as a control variable then?
You do two stages. You first explain the presence of migrants by McDonald's. So you run two models. You explain the distribution of migrants across Europe by where the McDonald's are. Then the prediction of that, you use that as an explanatory variable in explaining innovation. Okay? Right. In the Netherlands case, we linked all sorts of data, the same as we were talking about MyLead before. In Europe, they're doing this now, it's really fascinating research which links administrative data with survey data so that you can go within the firm and look at the diversity of the employees within the firm to look at, and here we didn't use patents, but we had a survey called the Innovation Survey, where you ask firms, what have you been doing about innovation, products, processes, and the like. And so that kind of research also showed that there is a relationship. Again, we have an issue about, well, what about if you even go to the firm level, do you still have a chicken and egg problem? Yes, you do. There we found within the Netherlands, we used another instrument. We used the presence of foreign restaurants, foreign restaurants per 10,000 municipality. So we went to each town and worked out how many foreign restaurants there were in this town. Then we looked at the firms within the town, and we then looked at the innovation behavior. Now, why would the presence of foreign restaurants is not directly related to innovation, but it is related to migration. So again, it is a good instrument to use. And then another thing, though, we did start to improve even further on this. We used the migrant stock from the past. So we used data from 2002, and we argue, well, there is networks on importance. So the migrant stock in 1996 was a useful instrument as well. What we did find there that it is more subtle than just saying more migrants means more innovation. It has to do with the composition of the migrant group, and the amount of firms that hired skilled migrants, the greater diversity of the foreign migrants enhances their product innovation. Then another set of research, we're running out of time, James. I warned him, I tend to be, was having lots of interesting things I want to get across with too little time. Basically, there's a lot of research around the world on the effect of migration on trade, and you would expect some effects, because we already talked about the networks. Now, networks are basically important for imports as well as exports. Because we've done research on this work by John Bryant, David Law, and Murat Genk here in New Zealand 2 years ago. And similar research has been done all around the world. So you can look at effects on imports and exports through different channels. So this is the network channel. And we find that basically it's kind of, the trade is a kind of a good story for both sides, for the sending country and the receiving country. It's kind of a story where we believe that the world as a whole benefits because of the gains to trade, both sides of the equation. So we looked at 48 studies. Again, this is a meta-analysis that all use the same approach. It's called the gravity model of trade. And we looked at the percentage change in trade when the number of migrants changed by 1%. And here's the table of all countries in the world there's been research on this, and New Zealand is highlighted. You see that the impact on New Zealand on exports is actually smaller than on imports. 7% on exports, 19% on imports. Intriguingly, for Australia, it's the opposite. 43% on exports, 21% on imports. If you look at the world as a whole, the export and import effect is the same. Okay? And so if you look at the tends to be, kind of look at, see that the import effect seems to be bigger than the export effect in a number of countries, like also the US, 90%, 16%, but still it seems to balance out for the world as a whole. So the conclusion of this is that an increase in the number of immigrants by 10% increases the volume of trade by about 1 to 2%. The impact is lower if you trade only in homogeneous goods. So the diversity of the migrants is in a sense reflected here in the diversity of the things that you export. The more diverse the population, the more diverse the range of exports. The import, as I said, is also similar. And finally, again, the benefits are more for countries of different level of development than, say, for Australia and New Zealand trade, okay, between the trans-Tasman trade, where there should tend to be very little barriers in any case. Now, I think that all this migration impact research has definitely also, some of it's, of course, similar work not done on New Zealand that Paul is going to talk about. It generally suggests positive, or at the worst, neutral impacts rather than negative economic impacts. Old myths are die hard. I've been here quite a long time, and I still read these strange, it just keeps on coming back in the media. It seems to be every new generation of reporters reports the same stuff from the previous one that I haven't learned something from. The Australian and New Zealand and Canadian policies are generally seen in the rest of the world by doing a lot of this work abroad. I find that we are seen as role models. You might find that we have our problems, but actually we can be proud in the sense that we do, and of course particular, for example, our point system, the way we formulate policies in this area are seen to be good, and in fact, if you, even in Europe, for some of these issues, get positive effects, well, would you get even better effects in countries which have the policies in place that should give better economic outcomes? If you want more detail, there's one report that I did jointly with Rob Hodgson and the Department of Labour on looking at the New Zealand economic impacts. You can just download that there. And finally, I put in an ad for my own new book coming out next year with Peter Nijkamp and Lydia Sahin. It's called Migration Impact Assessment, New Horizons. So another 12 months, I'd say, before it's out. But, okay, thank you.
Thank you, Jacques. Now we have 5 minutes for questions.
Jacques, thank you very much. That was really interesting. I might have a question that is reflected by the rest of the audience, I'm not sure, but perhaps you can give me and us a little bit more information on McDonald's and the research that led you to believe that McDonald's actually is a sort of hub for migrants. Any sort of research or evidence that you've got would be really interesting. Thank you.
Okay, well, thanks. It is a good question, and I guess it shows the fact that people find it kind of an odd kind of thing to look at when you're looking at this kind of really serious topic of what is the benefit of diversity or the presence of migrants on innovation. Why would you start using something as kind of is looking at McDonald's? Well, it's once again, the motivation is a technical one. So I'm looking for, as I said, it's this two-stage process where what you would do if you do this kind of quantitative work, you're saying you want to know, you try to estimate an equation. On the left-hand side, you put innovation, and on the right-hand side, you put everything that explains innovation. And of course, the things that would be how much money do firms have for R&D, the government policies, what have you. And then you also include the number of migrants, or the share of migrants. Now, the point is that I tried to make was, if you do that, just put in on the right-hand side the share of migrants, or the skill levels of migrants, then if I send it to a journal, the journal would say, yes, but you have a correlation, but you don't prove causation, because it could be just these firms that want to be innovative, they're recruiting particular types of people. So what you have to do, you have to look for something, it can be almost like an artificial construct. We call that the first stage regression. You have to have something that you can substitute for migrants in the equation, but it's still highly correlated with migrants, but in itself it doesn't explain innovation. So it's not like the hidden factor that explains innovation. So what motivated us to use McDonald's is that, sure, McDonald's, I was kind of joking a bit, McDonald's does innovate, but it is a global company that innovates almost the same everywhere throughout the world. It has a technology and a range of products. It's a slightly variation across countries because, you have a different kind of, we have certain products in New Zealand there that it's the kiwi burger, whatever, in France they have something else, etc. So, so technically, by using this, we kind of plugging in the equation what's left over of migrant location after, that is explained by the McDonald's, but we know it can't have anything to do with innovation in itself because that McDonald's one doesn't actually explain innovation. But by putting that in, I've predicted migration in a way that I know the causality must run from migration to innovation, if it's still significant as it was in the regression. So I hope that explains it a bit. It's kind of, it's a tough one because it's kind of like you need to come for our course in at Waikato. We teach this stuff. In fact, I mentioned John Gibson. He teaches this stuff at Waikato University. So.
All these are details of academia. This is why you too should be a university professor. But we have time for one more question. No more? Okay. Thank you very much, Jacques.